Thank you, and welcome to our episode of Behavioral Science Nerding. And this session will be one of the sessions where we talk about technology in our Mindshift and Modeshift series. We have had these conversations around going back and forth between what comes first, and I feel it's still one of the questions where nothing is first or second, is just going around in circles. One causes the other, and the in a circular way, that one causes the first one to trigger even more. As long as shared mobility goes and proliferates across cities, it's something that we love happening, and we don't really care if one comes after the other, as long as everything is growing. I have here to help me discuss more about technology and how it can change behavior, especially in shared mobility, with Natalia. Thank you for joining us again. And Chris from INVERS.
So I'm Chris, sales director over at INVERS, also a part-time science nerd. So I'm really excited about what Natalia has to say about the psychology and sociology of changing behaviors within these platforms. So INVERS has been building telematics for the last 30 years, and we really try to focus on a good user experience. And what's pertinent to this particular webinar is we really try to maximize the profit and loss for operations. And so what we're looking at a lot of the time is big costs around damages, around thefts, around insurance, all that kind of stuff. And these are some things that influencing the behavior of the users can reduce those costs and make all these projects more profitable, which is fantastic for everyone. So I'm really excited to be talking about this and seeing some different insights about what's coming up, and maybe give you guys some examples of what's happening with our customers.
Natalia Legal. I'm a behavioral scientist at movmi, specialized in transport behaviors. Surprise, surprise. I do spend my days thinking about behaviors and trying to change them. It's not always simple, even for a specialist like myself, because humans are fascinatingly messy. But that's why we're here. That's why we're having this discussion. And that's why we're asking this question. What's this? Is it Mindshift? Is it Modeshift? How do we do that? And I would like to say I don't know. Then it will sound really bad. But there's some ideas that I have. And like Venkatesh said, right? It has to come from multiple. The pressure points need to be pressed at the same time from the multiple points, and then we can get into more details on a few of these pressure points that should be pressed.
I mean, behavior definitely can be analyzed from so many data points, right? And technological tools can help us collect all this data. What kind of patterns have you seen when it comes to like behavioral, specifically to car sharing? And maybe throw in a few bits around like have you seen them change, if at all? And if you've seen them change, then how does it change? Does it change regionally? Does it change, by operator, by city? What have you observed?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with just some boundaries around what we know about, right? So we have over 40,000 vehicles now that are using driver analysis that we've tested. We've been doing this for the past year or so, so we have some insights, but I don't want to say that these are, across the board fantastic and correct and accurate all the way across. What we definitely find is that across all the different customers, across regions, across different types of business platform, everything's different. And so everybody tries to do some kind of different incentives or disincentives to keep people behaving in a way that is going to protect their assets, basically, and manage their finances within their business. So starting, say, with data points, right? Everybody's doing the same kind of thing. It doesn't matter what telematics you use. You've got a GPS in there, probably going to give you some kind of speeding, either if it's a GPS thing or if you're connected directly through the OBD2 or the CAN bus. Cross-reference that to see speeding. You're also got an accelerometer in there. You're going to see if you're doing harsh cornering, harsh braking, acceleration. Now, the reason that you're looking at these kind of data points is it gives you an idea of how the vehicles are being used, and thus what the risk is to getting in an accident, causing damage, and or theft. Now, if we're looking at this behavior, it's generally agreed that speeding and harsh acceleration are positive indicators that you're going to get potential crashes and stuff like this. But what's really interesting is when you start looking at different regional differences and how you can interpret the data. So let's say one person goes and speeds and they're going 40 kilometers an hour faster than they should be. Is that bad or worse than somebody who goes 10 speeding events, they're all 10 or 15 kilometers and over? And with that particular one, you're looking at, say, I live in Vancouver, Canada. We drive what Venkatesh, 20 or 30 on average over. So if you got those 10 pips that are like, 10 or 15 all the time, that's normal behavior. That means, that means nothing. Whereas, say, in Australia, you have much lower barriers around what, keeping to the speed limit. And so if somebody's going 15 kilometers over repeatedly, that is indicative of behavior that could cause an accident because it's different from the normal. It's also around what's the value of acceleration versus deceleration? Is that more important than speeding? And how do you actually build a driver profile that is indicative of what's going to happen, right? So it's kind of the first step, is knowing who's doing what before you can go and start influencing behavior, right? So going from there, there's also some regional things like working with some of our customers in Europe, for example. We find that France and Belgium are rougher areas for car shares because there's more vandalism and there's more theft there. This is kind of the same, like I find Melbourne is more theft than Sydney in general. So these are kind of considerations you're looking at. And then we've got, say, Southern and Eastern Europe, where vehicles are driven a lot harder, a lot more aggressively, but that's almost hand in hand with the fact that they're not pushing for compensation on damages as much. If it's a small damage, we just let it go. So are these kind of hands in hands? Is this like a chicken and egg situation? How does that work? So one more consideration you're looking at is like, what kind of a picture are you getting? Are you looking at like, hey, there's a threshold event, somebody decelerated at 0.6 Gs. Is that an accident? I don't know. But if you look at it and you say, okay, somebody decelerated 0.6 Gs, then there was maybe a shock event, then the car stopped, then the door opened, then looking at that whole picture, you can get a much better, accurate, idea of like, this actually was an accident. Somebody stopped, got out of the car, took a look, is like, what's going on? Doing that helps really reduce a lot of the false positives that the operations team is going to have to look at to isolate and filter out what are the relevant events that are happening. Going from there into what we can do about changing. In general, what we're finding is that like 80% of the trouble that you have as an operator comes from 20% of your users, right? So you want to filter down by region and find just those people that are the bad actors within your platform and try to do something about them, try to do some. And so this is where it gets really interesting in terms of the different customers, the different operations and how they do that, because some people are trying to reward good behavior, right? If you drive really well, all of your behavior is good, you're speeding, you're not accelerating too hard, maybe you can drive all the new cars, maybe the fancy cars. Whereas if it's the other way around, you're driving too hard, maybe you start sending out some, warnings like, hey, if you keep doing this, we're gonna kick you off the platform. So from there, just, I guess, quick, and apologies, I have to do kind of anonymous things, but we have some customers that have come up with about 10% of damages, which they've completely reduced. Just by looking, like, if they spent a month on this, they take the top 10 worst actors, they say, hey, stop it or else, and that reduced damages by 10%. Some people have said up to 70%, but this is all very new data, so I feel like that's maybe a bit high and the 10% is a bit low, so we can kind of go from there. There's also ways you can remove specific access, like specific demographics and locations have more damages associated with them. One of our operators, what they did is they said, hey, almost all the damage that happens, it's Friday and Saturday night, is young drivers. So we're just going to not let them drive on Friday or Saturday night. They can have the vehicles the rest of the time and damages go down. So it's a very slippery slope when you look at all this stuff, though, because tracking data and tracking your users is a really, really big, it's a really big item that you have to look at. Anyways, the bottom line is that when users know they're being monitored to some extent, if you have, say, a smoke detection thing on the window, probably not going to smoke. If your friend got some kind of speeding ticket and warning, maybe you're going to speed less in this vehicle. So it's a lot of positive behavior reinforcement, just knowing that people are watching and kind of following what's happening.
Yeah, fascinating. It was quite quite the quite the wide view of data insights and how operators could actually use them into, you could straight away penalize certain users, but at the same time, done well, these insights can actually help towards improving and making sure that the user sticks around. They know how to operate. They are incentivized to operate better, rather than just about penalizing when they're doing a mistake, right? So and I think this is where they have to strike a balance. I mean, as your system, data is available, right? And as you mentioned, one city, there could be more thefts than the other city. So the way, or the tightness of the process in the car sharing app or the software doesn't need to be at that level for every other city, right? So it's different, and if certain cities aren't there in terms of, those bad behaviors or those mishaps, then maybe not having the users go through all of that process, like marking every other damage that you find on your car, or trying to certify that, okay, I will never smoke, I will never speed over 50K or something like that. And then it's just, and I know, Natalia, in projects that we work together, you brought in these things as about you're scaring people away from using car sharing than making it what it should be. Like, everybody talks about car sharing being like, hey, this is convenient, this is happy, this is fun, but you have to sign this liability, and then you have to sign this, and then this privacy, and then and at that time, as a user, I'm like, I don't know, I would rather go and take my car, right? Which we don't want. So in that sense, there is really a balance to be struck. From the behavioral scientist in you, what would work better, carrot or stick?
It's an interesting question, because stick is too effective. And as Chris has just said, he's given us examples, operators use it and they get lower damages. And I was just, when thinking about this webinar, I thought about an example from my own country where I'm from, Poland. I went there last year and I was driving in the car with a friend and I saw something weird happening. Drivers were stopping at a pedestrian crossing. I have never seen it. They were letting pedestrians cross the street. And I asked my friend, I was like, what's happening? And he was like, well, government has introduced a €500 fine for not stopping at a pedestrian crossing. And of it, so not actually receiving the punishment or the being beaten with a stick, but the threat of it, just the thought of it, made people completely change their behavior. Carrots also work. When we think about subsidies for electric vehicles or e-bikes, they clearly work. But when we look at these two things, buying an e-bike, stopping at a pedestrian crossing, these are two very different behaviors. One is one-off, one is repeated. So, we always need to look at each behavior and see, okay, what is it that we have here? What can we put in place? What should we put in place? And what will work? And another thing to take into consideration is that both carrots and sticks, they work on the extrinsic motivation, so the external motivation. The user most likely will revert to their previous behaviors. So while we work on carrot and stick, it's important that we also work on the intrinsic motivation, on beliefs, on social norms. And I'm thinking an example from the transport sector: seatbelts. You needed a lot of things. You needed, first of all, technology, right? You needed technology, the seatbelt. You needed regulation, a lot of education and persuasive campaigns, fines. And now it's actually socially unacceptable not to wear a seatbelt in the Western world. But that was not the case 40 years ago. And this is, and now people are most people are not doing it because they're going to get fined. They're doing it because it's the good thing to do, because it's a safe thing to do. And I think that should be the end goal. So carrots and sticks as a kind of one part of what we do, but not the whole picture.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I like that part where you mentioned it's about intrinsic motivation and not just extrinsic, and trying to, surface certain elements of, I don't know if it exactly is social proof, but making you feel part of a community in how, like, hey, these many people have never sped over 50 kilometers or something, right? Just saying something so that the users would feel that, okay, so that's the norm, that's what people would do, and that's how people would, people, 90% of our users have in parking at, I don't know, at meter parking, or have in parking in a 90-degree parking, whatever. I mean, whatever is preferable from a fleet management side of things, and that way, as a user, they feel that they are part of the norm, and they are doing, or they are expected to do, what the others have been doing, and that way they don't feel left out, right? Not just being afraid of how they would behave. And maybe this is the season where we are booking vacations, people are traveling and all of that. And I also notice from hotel bookings or even flight bookings, right? So from hotel bookings, you see when you're in a property and scanning through what the property is, you keep noticing that there are these alerts which come across, and they say 31 people looked at this property, or 15 people just booked this property in the last 5 minutes. So it impacts in the back of my mind that, oh, actually this property is in demand, I should probably go and see.
Insurance, especially for car sharing, and even more so for micromobility, it's still new. I mean, obviously been around for a couple of years, but it's very hard to find somebody underwriting or providing insurance. You can find them, but what's happening is there's been so much damage lately that insurance providers are raising premiums, and they're starting to remove access to insurance. And what they're doing with existing customers, many of our customers are involved in conversations with insurance companies where they're trying to they're like, look, you have to reduce damages. If you can't reduce it, your premium's going up, or we're just not going to insure you anymore. And so the way that this has to happen, the way that they're proving they're reducing damage, is by taking driving analysis and saying, look, we're monitoring our users, we're finding the bad actors that are causing the majority of the damage, and we are mitigating it somehow, whether that means positive reinforcements, negative reinforcements, social proof. I think it's one of the biggest ones, that everybody else is driving well. Why are you the only one that's speeding, right? That kind of thing, really effective. And when the insurance companies see this, they're like, okay, you're putting effort in. Obviously, I mean, it's going to be a year before we can see that you've reduced damages on some kind of good average. But we see right now you're taking action. And so we'll continue to have this conversation, right? So one of the interesting things, I guess, around this is that when you're looking at insurance, insurance companies really tend to only care about 2 data points. I'm sure there's some that are extra, but most of them 2 data points. How often, like how much time per day the vehicle is used, and how securely it's been parked. And those are fantastic, and those are probably the biggest movers, insurance and stuff like that. But it doesn't take into account how good of a driver you are, how likely it is that your user base is going to crash the car and cause another claim. An interesting thing, I guess, the way that we're insured here in BC is if you have X number of years where you didn't have an accident, they reduce the premiums. but that's like a super long-term thing, right? That doesn't help individual car sharing people. It doesn't help if you're on the platform. It doesn't help if you're a new driver, right? So if you can start using this driver analysis to say like, hey, this guy is always the speed limit. The last 4, 5, 10 trips he's taken have been super safe. Let's drop the premiums. Now that's a very new blue sky kind of thought process that insurance companies are not doing. But if you are one of the lucky few that insures your own fleet, you can start doing this yourself. You can have like a sliding scale. It's like, hey man, you have been driving fantastically for the past 10 things, 10 trips that you've taken. That's fantastic. We're going to drop your insurance rates. Right? And the same thing, the people that are not like, look, you speed every single time. Step number 1 is you're getting a higher insurance premium if you want to keep using this platform. Step number 2, you don't get to use our platform anymore. Please do some good trips. Bring it back down, we'll drop the insurance again. So you have that flexibility to incentivize your people, because with all the insurance companies saying, hey, we don't trust this, everybody's doing damage and car sharing, we're gonna have huge premiums. You've got to push that over to your clients. And if you can use driver analysis to say like, hey, we're all safe, then you can give an offering that's actually cheaper, because you don't need to inflate that insurance premium cost all the way through.
There's 2 ways that we can use data. We can use it to inform our tactics, or we can use it to inform our strategy. And the difference will be in the end result. What I mean tactics is we can just kind of take a few data points, take a few nudges, take a few incentives, a few punishments, throw them in, see if they work, and then if they work, fine, we got a couple of points of difference. But what really makes a difference is thinking in terms of strategy. So looking at, okay, what is behavior? Or what are the barriers? Why are the people not doing what they're supposed to do? How can we influence it? What are the techniques? Should we use punishment to deter the one that we don't want to do the bad behavior, but also not to punish the good guys, not to threaten them, not to push them off the platform because they feel almost unsafe and scared of using the car share. I mean, that's something we see in research. People are afraid of paying for the damage they did not cause. And if we push this message, of a threat, then they will be deterred. However, if we do it strategically, then we can have a real impact.
So I think it's interesting also to look at the demographic of who your people are, right? There's a percentage of people at say the good side of behavior who you can incentivize to be even better, but they're already not causing you money. They're not damaging it. So maybe that's like from a strictly financial point of view, maybe it's not worth putting too much of your time there. And there's always going to be a percentage of people who, no matter what you do, are just going to take it for joyrides and away you go. So what you really want to look at is, how do I influence the middle percentage of people and bring them up? And I think maybe one example was, say, damage detection that we've been working on. I saw a stat we did a webinar last week, and they said 10 to 20% of your revenue gets eaten with damage, which is a really big number. And so if you have damage detection where something actually goes and there's an impact, you're like, hey, that was a damage, I'm pretty sure it was, let's follow that up. What that means is all of a sudden, I don't have to take 10 pictures of the car every time I pick it up. And how many people just like get in the car and go, because maybe me. Because I know that if something happens, it'll get picked up, and then I'll take a picture then, and then away we go. So that's actually like improving the customer, the pickup, the user flow of getting a car in the first place. And from there, I just think there's a lot of value in positive reinforcement for people that are maybe on the line of where, like, saying, hey, you were 75% of the time of that last trip, like bang on the speed limit. Here's some cool perk, free trip, half price trip, bring your friend next time, get to ride in the new Polestar 2, which only people with a 4-star rating get to ride in, etc. Like those kind of benefits that'll like pull people that are like maybe gonna cause a little bit of damage some of the time, bring them up into the good demographic of people.
I like how
Okay.
you work on cues, right? And like you say, reinforcement, and it's learning. The first time people do something, they maybe haven't done it consciously. The second time, they'll get a reminder. The third time, they will feel the threat if they did something wrong. Whereas if we were talking about the positive reinforcement, they'll feel the little butterflies in the stomach. Dopamine, nice. I got a free thing. I'm going to do it again. Yeah. And there's a great example from BC Hydro, which is the energy company in Canada. They did use a little bit of gamification to get people to save energy. They have this really cool program called Team Power Smart, but that was not all they used. They used a little bit of incentives. They did a lot of social proof, monitoring, but also they used very clever marketing that built on people's local identity. Help us, protect the region by saving energy. And also they didn't just do gamification; they did a whole analysis beforehand. So they looked, what behaviors are we looking at? Why? How are we going to influence? And translated into shared mobility sector, what I want to say is we shouldn't use behavioral insight and data as sprinkles on the cake, but really as a flour from which the cake is made, because that's where we will have the most impact.
I like that. I just jump
Like
in
that
maybe.
analogy.
I was just
Yes.
back in Germany at the headquarters for INVERS, and we were driving around, and somebody got a beep on their phone because they were using Duolingo to learn Germany while they were on site, and somebody had passed them in rank, and they're like, "Whoa, I've got to do some lessons immediately." Like Bob, whoever Bob is, we don't know, it's anonymous, but he's outranked me. I've got to get back up, so I've got to do 2 or 3 lessons right now. I'm like, we're driving in the car. We do this late, but it was just really interesting to watch that kind of engagement. And I think to your point there, Natalia, about like regionality, like imagine if it was like, Vancouver, for example, versus Burnaby. Oh, we have better drivers or something like that. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I want to like do something for the team. It's not just me anymore. It's incentivizing that behavior.
Science to prove that. It's better to encourage competition between teams than within a team. It just works better, and you've got much less people that get discouraged and are like, oh no, I give up. So yep. Go for it.
I loved all of those. I think we basically graduated the discussion from what data and insights and behavior can be versus what strategically they can be used for. So it's been a great discussion. Thank you so much. We will have to close and wrap this session around, and I think this has so much that can snowball into a different session altogether again on a technology topic. Before we wrap up, if you had to pick one takeaway that the listeners for this recording should have from the session, what would your pick be? Maybe Natalia, you go first, and then Chris. One line, one thing.
I think behavioral science is, French pain chocolat. I think behavioral science is the crust and data is the chocolate. So they work together.
I love it. I will follow that up with try your best to get a full picture of incidents. Don't work on a single data point. Try to understand the whole thing, because you don't want to just say like, oh man, everybody decelerates really, really fast and it's terrible. Well, maybe it's that corner. Maybe there's a crosswalk right there that people are using badly. And then that's another thing you can tell the city, right, for the infrastructure, but try to get a full picture so you understand what's actually happening.
Super. I think I love it. And from my end, I think my biggest takeaway is the 80-20 rule that Chris, you spoke about, of who actually matters to your business versus the rest who may be negatively impacted by a message, right? So, and clubbing that with Natalia's point about carrot and stick, there are different approaches what you need to take about for this 20% versus the 80%. And that's the focus around it. And as long as they get this right, ridership could be improving. Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure talking to you. And let's see where the whole ridership and behavioral analysis goes next.